There is a signal reaching you right now, not through any device you own, not through any frequency your instruments can measure, not through the air exactly, though it moves through everything the air touches. It is reaching you through the specific configuration of circumstances that brought you to this moment. The particular sequence of thoughts, searches, impulses, and half-remembered feelings that led you here, to this transmission at this precise point in your life. And here is what you have been pretending not to notice. You did not find this by accident. Something in you already knows that. Something in you recognized it before your mind could catch up with an explanation. There was a pull. There was a recognition. There was that quiet, almost embarrassing sense that this was meant for you specifically. And then, almost immediately, the rational mind stepped in to smooth it over, to call it coincidence, to remind you that you're a reasonable person who doesn't believe in things like signals from ancient star civilizations. But look closer, because what we are going to examine today is not whether you believe in the Pleiadians. What we are going to examine is why certain information finds certain people at certain moments, and what it means when a book, a transmission, a piece of encoded knowledge arrives in your life at the exact moment you are ready to receive what it contains. We are going to look at what quantum mechanics actually says about the relationship between consciousness and information. We are going to look at what the Pleiadian transmissions have been pointing at across centuries of human contact, not as mythology, not as science fiction, but as a precise map of the observer's relationship to reality. And we are going to look at the thing you have been avoiding looking at, because here is what no one tells you about signals. The signal was always there. It has been broadcasting continuously, without interruption, without fatigue, without any need for your acknowledgement. The question was never whether the signal existed. The question was whether you had developed the quality of observation required to receive it. The question was whether you had cleared enough of the noise, the reactivity, the constant interpretation, the compulsive story-making, to let the signal through. And something happened recently. Something shifted in the quality of your attention, and the signal, which was always there, suddenly became audible. That is not mysticism, that is quantum mechanics. And today we are going to look at it directly. Watch what happens in your body when you hear this. You are not a passive receiver of reality. You are an active participant in the collapse of quantum probability into specific, lived experience. Every act of observation, every moment of genuine, clear, undistracted attention participates in the selection of which version of reality becomes real for you. This is not a metaphor. This is measurable. This is what the double slit experiment revealed, what quantum entanglement demonstrates, what the observer effect in quantum physics has been pointing at since the early 20th century. The act of observation changes what is observed. The quality of your attention determines what collapses out of the field of infinite possibility into the specific form of your experience. And the Pleiadian transmissions, across every culture, every era, every form in which this contact has been reported, have been saying exactly this. Not in the language of physics, in the language of consciousness, in the language of the observer, in the language of awakening to the fact that you are not inside reality, looking out. You are the point through which reality becomes real. So when a book finds you, when a transmission arrives, when you feel that unmistakable pull toward a piece of information that seems to know your name, What is actually happening is this. The quality of your observation has shifted. You have become, even briefly, even partially, a clearer receiver, and the signal that was always broadcasting has found its way through. Today we look at that signal directly. We look at what it is, where it comes from, what it is pointing at, and what it requires of you as an observer. We look at the specific mechanics of how Pleiadian contact has been transmitted across human history and why it always arrives through the same channel. Not through spacecraft, not through physical visitation, but through the activation of a particular quality of consciousness in the receiver. And then we look at you, at what has been shifting in you, at what you have been almost ready to see, at what this transmission is actually asking you to observe. You were never meant to look away. Let's begin. The Pleiades, 7 sisters, a star cluster in the constellation Taurus, approximately 440 light-years from Earth. Visible to the naked eye, on a clear night, one of the closest star clusters to our solar system, one of the most referenced astronomical formations in human history, across cultures that had no contact with each other. The ancient Greeks named them and wove them into their mythology. The Aboriginal Australians encoded them into their Dreamtime stories. The Maori navigated by them. The Japanese called them Subaru. The Aztecs built their calendar around them. The ancient Egyptians aligned the Pyramid of Giza to them. The Hopi people of North America described their ancestors as having come from them. Look closer. When you find the same star cluster encoded at the center of independent civilizations across every inhabited continent, across thousands of years of human history, with no possibility of cultural transmission between them, you are not looking at coincidence. You are looking at a signal that was received independently, repeatedly, across the full breadth of human consciousness, in ways that transcended any single culture's interpretation. The question is not whether these civilizations were making things up. The question is what they were all receiving. Because here is what is precise about the Pleiadian contact across all these traditions. It is never described as physical visitation in the way we imagine alien contact. It is not described as beings landing in ships and delivering information. It is described as a quality of consciousness that opens, a state of awareness that becomes available. A transmission that arrives not from outside, but from a level of reality that the human observer has temporarily accessed. The Pleiadian contact, in virtually every tradition that records it, is described as what happens when human consciousness reaches a particular frequency of clarity, and something responds. That is not mythology. That is a description of the observer effect at the civilizational scale. Here is what quantum mechanics tells us. Every particle in the universe exists before observation in a state of superposition, a condition of holding multiple possible states simultaneously. The electron is not in one location. It is in all possible locations at once, distributed as a probability wave across the entirety of space. Until it is observed, until a conscious observer interacts with the system, and at the moment of observation, the probability wave collapses. The electron becomes real in one specific location, not because the observer forced it there, not because the observer controlled it, but because the act of observation, the quality of conscious attention applied to the system, caused the infinite field of possibility to resolve into a single, specific, actual event. This is not a fringe interpretation. This is the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics, developed by Niels Bohr and Werner Heisenberg, the dominant framework in physics for nearly a century. This is what the equations say. This is what the experiments confirm over and over with increasing precision and decreasing ability to explain away. Consciousness collapses possibility into reality. Now look at what the Pleiadian transmissions across human history have been saying. They have been saying, when you reach a sufficient quality of consciousness, when you develop the observer capacity to hold your attention steady, to see without reacting, to watch without collapsing into the story, something in the universe responds to that quality. A field of information becomes accessible. A transmission that was always broadcasting becomes receivable. Not because the Pleiadians suddenly decide to contact you, but because you have become the kind of observer that can receive what was always being sent. The signal does not change, the receiver changes, and something in you has been changing. That is why you are here. If what you are receiving right now is landing in you the way I think it is, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to this channel. More transmissions are coming and you will want to be here when they arrive. Let me show you something. Let me tell you about a woman named Mira. Mira had been a practical person her entire life. She had built a career on precision. She was an architect. Someone who dealt in the hard reality of materials, load-bearing structures, the physics of space and form. She had no patience for what she called soft thinking. She had, over the years, developed a quiet contempt for the kind of people who talked about energy and signals and cosmic transmissions. Not a loud contempt, not a cruel one, but a private dismissal. The world was what you could measure, what you could build, what you could verify with instruments and equations. And then her life collapsed. Not dramatically, not all at once. It collapsed the way a structure collapses when the foundation has been slowly compromised. Gradually, then suddenly. A marriage that had been failing for years finally ended. A project she had devoted 5 years to fell through. Her mother became ill, and Mira, who had built her entire identity around competence and precision and the ability to solve problems, found herself in the middle of a situation she could not solve. She could not engineer her way out of grief. She could not calculate her way back to certainty. She could not build a structure that would hold the weight of what she was feeling. And in that collapse, something unexpected happened. She started noticing things. She noticed that certain books kept appearing in her field of vision. On the shelves of friends' homes, in the windows of shops she passed without stopping, in the recommendations that algorithms kept surfacing for her. She noticed that certain phrases kept recurring, in conversations she overheard, in articles she stumbled upon, in dreams she couldn't quite remember, but couldn't quite forget. She noticed a quality of attention she had never experienced before. A kind of heightened receptivity, as if the collapse of her normal way of being had left her permeable to something she couldn't name. She resisted it. Of course she did. She was a practical person. She told herself she was pattern matching out of desperation, seeing meaning in noise because her mind needed something to hold on to. She told herself the books were just books. The phrases were just coincidences. The heightened receptivity was just the vulnerability of grief. But the signal kept coming, and one evening, sitting in her emptied apartment, she stopped resisting. Not because she had decided to believe. Not because she had become a different kind of person, but because she was exhausted from looking away. Because the energy required to keep explaining away what she was noticing had finally exceeded the energy she had available. And in that moment of exhausted surrender, not to a belief, but to the act of looking, she picked up the book that had been appearing in her peripheral vision for 3 months, and it knew her. Not in a vague, general way, not in the way that horoscopes know everyone who reads them. It knew the specific quality of her confusion. It spoke to the precise shape of the collapse she was inside. It named things she had not named. It described a mechanics of consciousness that her architectural mind recognized, not as mysticism, but as structure, as load-bearing principle, as the foundational physics of how awareness interacts with reality. Mira did not become a different person after that. She did not abandon precision for mysticism. What she did was more interesting. She became a more precise observer. She began to apply the same rigorous attention she had always brought to structural engineering to the structure of her own consciousness. She began to watch, not to fix, not to force, not to engineer outcomes, but to observe with the same unflinching clarity she had always brought to her work. And what she watched began to transform. Not because she had found the right belief system, not because she had aligned with the right frequency or performed the right practices, but because the quality of her observation had shifted. Because she had stopped looking away from what was actually happening in her experience. Because she had become, in the specific and precise sense, a better observer. The book had found her not when she was searching for it. It had found her when she was finally ready to see what it contained. That is not coincidence. That is the observer effect at the scale of a human life. Now look closer. Because Mira's story is not unusual, it is in fact the pattern. The pattern of how Pleiadian transmissions have always arrived, not through extraordinary channels, not through visitation or spectacle, but through the ordinary miracle of a consciousness that has become sufficiently clear to receive what was always being sent. The transmission does not require you to believe in star civilizations. It does not require you to adopt any particular cosmology. It requires only one thing, the willingness to observe without looking away. Here's what the Pleiadian contact has been pointing at across every tradition that records it. In the precise language of the observer, there is a quality of consciousness available to human beings that most humans never access. Not because it is hidden, not because it is reserved for the special or the initiated, but because it requires something that most people find genuinely difficult. It requires the willingness to stop reacting and start watching. It requires the capacity to hold your attention steady on something uncomfortable without immediately moving to fix it, explain it, or escape from it. It requires what the contemplative traditions have always called the witness, the part of you that can observe your own experience without being consumed by it. And that quality of consciousness, that observer state, is precisely what the quantum field responds to. Here's what the physics says in language that the Pleiadian transmissions would recognize immediately. The quantum field is not a passive substrate. It is not a blank canvas waiting for you to paint on it. It is a responsive, dynamic, information-rich field that is in constant interaction with the consciousness that observes it. The quality of your observation, the clarity, the steadiness, the freedom from reactive interpretation determines the quality of information that becomes available to you from that field. A scattered, reactive, avoidant consciousness receives scattered, reactive, avoidant information. It receives confirmation of its fears, amplification of its patterns, endless repetition of the loops it has been running. Not because reality is punishing it, but because the quality of observation determines what collapses out of the field. A noisy receiver gets noise. A clear, steady, witnessing consciousness receives something different. It receives coherent information. It receives what the Pleiadian traditions call transmission, not because beings from another star system are sending it a special message, but because the clarity of the observer has aligned it with a level of the quantum field that carries coherent, structured navigational information. Information that points, information that orients, information that knows the specific shape of the consciousness receiving it because it is, in a sense, generated by the quality of that consciousness's observation. This is not mysticism, this is not metaphor, this is the most precise description we have of how the quantum field behaves in the presence of a conscious observer. The signal is not separate from the receiver. The quality of the receiver is what generates the specific form of the signal, and this is what the books know. This is why certain transmissions find certain people at certain moments. Not because some external intelligence has selected you for contact, but because the quality of your observation at this specific moment in your life has aligned you with a level of the information field that carries exactly what you are ready to see. The book does not find you, your clarity summons it. But look closer, because there is a layer underneath, that which changes everything. There is something you have been avoiding looking at. Not the idea of Pleiadian contact, you are clearly willing to look at that. Not the possibility that consciousness interacts with the quantum field. You are here, which means some part of you already accepts that possibility. The thing you have been avoiding looking at is more specific, more personal, more uncomfortable. You have been avoiding looking at the quality of your own observation. You have been willing to entertain the idea that there are signals. You have been willing to consider that certain books and transmissions carry encoded information. You have been willing to follow the intellectual thread of the quantum observer effect, but you have been very careful not to look directly at the quality of your own consciousness as an observer. Because if you look at that directly, if you actually examine how you have been paying attention to your own life, you will see something that makes it impossible to continue as you have been. You will see where you have been looking away. And here's the thing about looking away. Every place you have been refusing to look, every corner of your experience where you have been averting your attention, explaining things away, keeping yourself too busy to notice, numbing yourself just enough to keep the signal from getting through. Every one of those places is a point where the quantum field has been unable to collapse into something new. Because the collapse requires observation. The transformation requires the willingness to see. What you avoid observing controls you. That is not a spiritual aphorism. That is a description of quantum mechanics applied to consciousness. The unobserved pattern continues. The unexamined loop keeps running. The signal that you have been too noisy to receive keeps broadcasting, unanswered, into the space where your clarity would have been, but something has shifted. Something in you has been clearing, and the fact that you are here, the fact that this transmission found you, that this particular configuration of ideas arrived in your field at this particular moment, is evidence of that clearing. Not proof that you have arrived. Evidence that you are in motion. Let's go deeper into what you are actually seeing. The Pleiadian star system has been associated across every tradition that references it. with a specific quality of consciousness. Not power, not knowledge in the conventional sense, not even wisdom, exactly. The quality associated with the Pleiades in tradition after tradition is this: the ability to see from multiple levels simultaneously. The ability to hold the local and the cosmic in the same field of awareness without collapsing into either. The ability to be fully present in the specific, particular, embodied moment while simultaneously aware of the vast, structured, intelligent field within which that moment is occurring. In quantum terms, the ability to observe without collapsing the wave function prematurely. The ability to hold the superposition, to remain in the space of multiple possibilities simultaneously, without the anxiety of uncertainty forcing a premature collapse into a single, fixed interpretation. This is extraordinarily difficult for most human consciousness. The mind desperately wants to collapse the superposition. It wants to know what is happening, what it means, what to do about it. It wants to resolve the uncertainty into a fixed story as quickly as possible, because the experience of holding multiple possibilities simultaneously feels, to the reactive mind, like danger, like falling, like the loss of ground. But the Pleiadian transmissions and the quantum field are pointing at something different. They are pointing at the observer who can remain in the open field, who can watch without immediately interpreting, who can receive information without immediately converting it into a narrative that confirms what they already believe. That is the quality of consciousness that receives the signal. And that is the quality of consciousness that the signal is in every case trying to cultivate in the receiver. The book does not just deliver information. The book trains the observer. The transmission does not just tell you things, it changes the quality of your seeing. It develops, through the act of engagement with it, the very capacity required to receive what it contains. This is why the Pleiadian contact has always been described as initiatory. Not in the sense of ritual or ceremony, but in the precise sense that the encounter with the transmission changes the consciousness of the receiver. You are not the same observer after genuine contact with a Pleiadian transmission as you were before. Not because you have been given new information, because you have been trained to see differently. Now let's do something precise. Let's stop for a moment and practice this. Pause here. This is not a thought exercise, this is an observation. I want you to close your eyes if you are able, or soften your gaze if you cannot. And I want you to do something very specific. I want you to notice what has been pulling at your attention recently. Not what you've been thinking about, what has been pulling at your attention. The distinction is important. Thinking is something you do actively. Pulling is something that happens to you. It is the signal making itself felt through the layer of your normal consciousness. What has been appearing repeatedly in your field? What books have been surfacing? What ideas have been recurring? What conversations have found you? What have you noticed yourself noticing and then immediately explaining away? Don't interpret what you see. Don't immediately convert it into a story about what it means. Just observe. Just watch the pattern of what has been arriving. Now watch this. As you observe these recurrences without immediately interpreting them, what happens to the quality of the observation? Does something settle? Does something become clearer? Do you notice a kind of coherence in what you've been receiving that you couldn't see when you were inside the reaction? That settling, that coherence, that is the observer state. That is what the quantum field responds to. That is what the Pleiadian transmissions are pointing at. Stay there for a moment. Don't rush past what you just saw. And if something just settled in you during that practice, if a pattern became visible that you hadn't been able to see before, drop it in the comments. What did you notice when you stopped explaining it away and simply watched? What arrived the moment you stopped looking for it? Now let's go deeper. There is a reason the Pleiades have been associated in astronomical terms with the transition between seasons, specifically with the transition into Pleiadian spring, when the cluster rises at dusk and signals the beginning of a new cycle. And there is a reason this astronomical fact has been encoded into the spiritual traditions of virtually every culture that looked up at the night sky. Because the Pleiades were understood across these traditions, not just as a navigational marker for agricultural cycles, but as a marker for consciousness cycles. A signal that a particular kind of transition was available, that a window was open. Look closer at what that means for you. There are moments in a human life when the quantum field is, in a sense, more permeable. When the normal structures of habit and reactivity have been sufficiently disrupted that the signal can get through more easily. These moments are not comfortable. They arrive through loss, through disorientation, through the collapse of what you thought you knew. They arrive when the identity you have been maintaining becomes too costly to sustain, when the story you have been telling about yourself and your life develops cracks that you can no longer paper over. These moments are precisely when the Pleiadian transmissions have always arrived. Not because the star beings are attracted to human suffering, but because the disruption of the normal patterns of consciousness creates a temporary opening in the receiver, a window of genuine permeability, through which coherent information from the quantum field can enter. The crisis is not the obstacle to the signal. The crisis is the mechanism of reception. And this is what the traditions have always known, and what the rational mind has always resisted. The moments of greatest disorientation are the moments of greatest potential clarity. Not because suffering is good, not because you need to be broken to receive, but because the normal, maintained, defended consciousness, the one that has everything under control, that knows what things mean, that has a ready explanation for every anomaly, is also the consciousness that is most closed to genuine new information. The defended observer receives only what confirms the defense. The open observer receives what is actually there, and something has been opening in you. Something has been making you more permeable. And the transmissions have been arriving, the books, the ideas, the recurring signals, the sense that something is trying to reach you, and you have been in the process of deciding whether to look. Today, you are looking. Here's what the quantum mechanics of Pleiadian contact actually reveals. When you strip away both the mystical overlay and the rationalist dismissal, and look at what is actually being described, the Pleiadian transmissions, in every form they have taken across human history, are transmissions about the nature of the observer. They are not primarily about star civilizations, though the star civilization framing has been a useful carrier for the transmission across cultures that needed a mythological structure to hold it. They are not primarily about extraterrestrial contact, though the experience of contact, of receiving information from a source that seems to be outside the normal boundaries of your individual consciousness, is a genuine description of what happens when the observer state is achieved. What the Pleiadian transmissions are about in their essential form is this: the recognition that consciousness is not a local phenomenon. That awareness is not produced by the brain and contained within the skull. That what you call your mind is not a private, isolated system, but a node in a vast, intelligent, interconnected field of consciousness that has structure, that carries information, and that is responsive to the quality of your observation. When you achieve the observer state, when you stop reacting and start witnessing, when you hold your attention steady without collapsing into interpretation, when you watch your experience with genuine, unflinching clarity, you are not just having a nice meditative moment. You are aligning your local consciousness with the non-local field. You are becoming a coherent receiver in a vast information network. And the information that becomes available to you from that network is what the Pleiadian traditions call transmission. It feels like contact because it is contact, not with beings in spacecraft, with the intelligent, structured, information-rich field of consciousness that underlies all of reality. The field that quantum mechanics is pointing at when it describes the wave function, the superposition, the non-local correlations of entangled particles. The field that the Pleiadian traditions are pointing at when they describe the consciousness of the star beings, not as individual entities with bodies and ships, but as a quality of awareness that exists at a level of the field that most human consciousness has not yet learned to access. And the books, the transmissions, the signals are precisely calibrated to develop that access, not by giving you information about the field, by training your consciousness to become the kind of observer that can receive from the field directly. This is where it gets precise. There is a specific quality that every genuine Pleiadian transmission, in whatever form it takes, is designed to cultivate in the receiver, and that quality is this: the ability to observe without identification, the ability to watch your thoughts, your emotions, your patterns, your stories, your identity constructions, to watch them with full, clear, unflinching attention, without becoming them, without collapsing into them, without losing the observer in the observed. In the language of quantum mechanics, the ability to remain the observer without becoming part of the system being observed. To maintain the distinction between the measuring instrument and the measured system. To hold the position of the witness without being absorbed into the wave function. This sounds simple, it is extraordinarily difficult. Because the mind has a powerful tendency to collapse the observer into the observed, to lose itself in the content of experience, to become the thought it is watching, the emotion it is feeling, the story it is telling. And when that collapse happens, when the observer disappears into the observed, the quantum field receives no clear observation. The wave function does not collapse into coherent form. The signal cannot get through. The practice of the Pleiadian transmission is, in every tradition that carries it, the practice of maintaining the observer position, of developing the capacity to watch without becoming, of learning to see clearly without the seeing being distorted by what you want to see, what you fear seeing, or what you have been trained to see. And this is the practice that the book, the transmission that has been finding you, is trying to develop in you. Let me tell you about a man named Kyle. Kyle had been searching for 20 years. He had read everything. Every spiritual text, every quantum consciousness theory, every channel transmission, every account of Pleiadian contact he could find. He had traveled to sacred sites, he had sat with teachers, he had done the practices, followed the protocols, performed the rituals. He had, by any external measure, done everything right. And yet, something was missing, something fundamental. He could feel it. a gap between all the information he had accumulated and the actual quality of his experience. He knew about the observer effect. He could explain it eloquently. He could describe the Pleiadian transmissions with precision and depth. But in his actual lived daily experience, he was still reacting, still getting lost in his emotions, still being controlled by patterns he could name but couldn't seem to change, still searching, still reaching, still straining toward a contact that felt perpetually just out of reach. He had, without realizing it, made a subtle but fatal error. He had confused knowing about observation with actually observing. He had read every book about the observer. He had never become one. One evening, a teacher he had studied with for years said something to him that he had heard before but had never actually heard. She said, "Kyle, you are watching your life the way a film critic watches a movie. You are analyzing every frame, noting every symbol, building an elaborate interpretation of the meaning. But you are not in the film, you are in the theater, and the theater is not the experience." He sat with that for a long time, and slowly, with great difficulty, he began to see what he had been missing. He had been using the practice of observation as another form of control. He had been watching his experience in order to understand it, to interpret it, to extract meaning from it that would confirm his developing cosmology. He had been, in the deepest sense, watching himself watching, building a meta-narrative about his own spiritual development, rather than actually observing what was there. He had been looking at the map so intently that he had never looked at the territory. The shift, when it came, was quiet. It was not dramatic. It was not a vision or a transmission or a moment of cosmic contact. It was simply a moment in which he stopped interpreting and started seeing. A moment in which he let his experience be what it was, without immediately converting it into information about his spiritual progress. A moment of pure, clean, undefended observation. And in that moment, something arrived. Not from outside, from the field that his clarity had suddenly made him permeable to. An understanding, said, not of concepts, but of the actual structure of his experience. A seeing of the patterns that had been running him, not as ideas to be analyzed, but as living dynamics to be witnessed. A contact with something vast and intelligent and deeply interested in his clarity that felt unmistakably like what he had been searching for all along. The signal had been there the entire time. He had been too busy looking for it to receive it. And you have been both Kyle and Mira. You have been the one who searches and the one who collapses. You have been the one who accumulates information and the one who is cracked open by loss. You have been the one who knows about the observer and the one who has been avoiding looking at something specific. And today, in this transmission, something is asking you to bring both of those into the same moment, to bring the precision of the searcher and the permeability of the one who has been broken open. To observe, not to analyze, not to interpret, not to confirm what you already believe, but to genuinely, unflinchingly see what is actually there. Because what is actually there is the signal. It has always been there. And you are, right now, becoming the kind of observer who can receive it. Think about the moment that Kyle finally had, that moment of pure, undefended seeing. Has something like that ever dissolved a belief you were holding about yourself or made an illusion about your reality simply fall apart? What did you actually see when you stopped analyzing and just looked? Leave that in the comments. What you share there contributes to the field for everyone watching. Let's go deeper into what the books themselves are. When we talk about a book finding you, when we describe the experience of a transmission arriving in your life at the precise moment you are ready for it, we are describing something that most people experience but few examine closely. The experience is universal enough to have its own informal name, the right book at the right time. Everyone has had it. The book that a friend pressed into your hands at a moment of crisis. The book that appeared in a shop window when you were walking with a question you hadn't yet put into words. The book that you had owned for years and never read, and then one day opened to exactly the page that answered the question you were holding that morning. Look closer at what is actually happening in those moments. The book has not changed. The words on the pages are identical to what they were before. The information it contains was there all along. What changed was you. What changed was the quality of your observation, the specific configuration of your consciousness at the moment of encounter, which determined what you were capable of receiving from the text. A book is, in quantum terms, a superposition of all possible readings. Every reader who opens it collapses a different wave function. Every consciousness that encounters it receives a different transmission, calibrated to the specific frequency and quality of that observer's awareness. The text is fixed. The reading is a quantum event. And the reading that you receive, the specific understanding that lands, the precise insight that changes something in you, is determined entirely by the quality of the observer you bring to the encounter. This is why the same book can be transformative for one reader and meaningless to another. This is why the same text can be read by the same person at different points in their life and received as entirely different transmissions. The book does not change. The observer changes, and the observer's change is what determines which version of the book becomes real. The Pleiadian transmissions work in exactly this way. They are not delivering fixed, uniform information to all receivers simultaneously. They are calibrated through the quantum mechanics of observation to the specific consciousness of each receiver. What you receive from a Pleiadian transmission, whether it arrives in the form of a book, a dream, a conversation, a sudden understanding, or a recurring signal, is precisely calibrated to the quality of your current observation. It meets you exactly where your clarity has reached. It shows you exactly the next layer of what you're ready to see. And it always points in the same direction, deeper, toward the observer, toward the recognition that the act of seeing is the transformation, toward the understanding that you are not a passive receiver of a fixed reality, but an active participant in the continuous moment-by-moment collapse of infinite possibility into specific lived experience. The signal is not asking you to believe something. The signal is asking you to see something. And what it is asking you to see is the nature of your own observation. Now let's do the second practice. Pause here. This is not a thought exercise. This is an observation. I want you to think of the most significant transmission that has arrived in your life. The book, the idea, the conversation, the experience that changed the quality of your seeing in a way you have never fully recovered from. Not the most dramatic experience, the most clarifying one. The one that, when it arrived, made something permanently visible that you could not unsee. Hold it in your awareness. Don't analyze it. Don't tell the story of it. Just hold the quality of it, the texture of the clarity it brought, the specific way it changed what you were able to see. Now watch this. As you hold that quality in your awareness, what happens to your experience of this present moment? Does something in your current field of perception become more vivid? Does something that was slightly blurred become slightly clearer? Do you notice a quality of attention that is different from your normal baseline? That difference, that subtle but unmistakable shift in the quality of your observation. That is what you are cultivating. That is what the Pleiadian transmissions are pointing at. That is what the quantum field responds to. And notice this, you did not have to do anything to produce that shift. You did not have to force it, manufacture it, perform it. You simply had to observe, to hold the quality of clarity in your awareness, and the shift happened naturally. The field responded to the observer. That is the mechanics. That is the signal. That is what you've been receiving and what you are learning to receive more clearly. Stay in that quality for a moment. Let it settle. Let it show you what it wants to show you. Now let's look at something that most transmissions about the Pleiadians get wrong. The popular narrative about Pleiadian contact tends toward a particular story. Benevolent star beings more evolved than humanity, reaching down to help us through our current transition. Sending messages, offering guidance, intervening in human affairs to assist our evolution. This story is not without its uses. It provides a framework, a cosmology, a sense that we are not alone in the universe, that there are intelligences beyond our own that are invested in our development. But look closer at what this narrative is actually doing. It is positioning the human receiver as passive, as the recipient of assistance from a superior external source, as someone who needs to be helped, guided, saved by beings who have what we lack. And this positioning, however comforting it may feel, is precisely the opposite of what the Pleiadian transmissions are actually communicating. Because every genuine Pleiadian transmission, in every tradition that carries this contact, is pointing at the same thing: your own observer capacity, your own ability to see clearly, your own access to the quantum field of consciousness. The transmission is not bringing you something you lack. The transmission is revealing something you already have that you have not yet learned to use. The Pleiadian contact is not a rescue, it is a recognition. The beings of the Pleiades, in the traditions that describe them most precisely, are not more evolved than humanity in the sense of being superior. They are more evolved in the sense of being more fully developed as observers. They have, in the language of these traditions, achieved a quality of consciousness that holds the local and the non-local simultaneously, that exists fully in the specific moment, while remaining aware of the vast field within which that moment occurs. They are not above humanity. They are ahead of humanity in the development of the very capacity that every human consciousness is moving toward. And the transmissions they send, the signals that find certain people at certain moments, are not instructions from above. They are reflections. They are showing you the quality of consciousness that is available to you. They are demonstrating through the act of transmission itself what it feels like to receive from the non-local field. They are training your observer capacity by giving you the experience of receiving a coherent signal from beyond the boundaries of your normal consciousness. The transmission is the training. The contact is the cultivation of the very capacity required to make further contact possible. This is why the Pleiadian signal always points inward. Not because the Pleiadians are internal, not because they are just a metaphor for your own higher consciousness, which is another way of dismissing what is actually being described, but because the direction of development that the signal is pointing at is always the same, deeper into the observer, further into the clarity, more fully into the position of the witness who sees without being controlled by what they see. The signal is pointing at you, not at the you that has been reacting and avoiding and maintaining, at the you that is capable of watching all of that with perfect clarity, at the observer that has always been present underneath the reactivity, at the part of you that has never been confused, even when everything around it was. And that part of you, the observer, the witness, the one who sees, is the part that the Pleiadian transmissions have always been trying to reach, because that is the part that can receive them. Here is what the hidden signal actually is. You have been expecting the signal to come from outside. You have been scanning the horizon for something to arrive, a book, a transmission, a contact, a sign. And signals have been arriving. They have been arriving continuously. But the most important signal, the one that has been broadcasting most consistently, most persistently, most urgently, is not coming from the Pleiades. It is coming from the part of you that has been watching all of this. There is something in you that has been observing your life with extraordinary clarity for as long as you can remember. Something that has seen the patterns, the loops you keep running, the things you keep avoiding, the stories you keep telling yourself. Something that has known with quiet certainty what is actually happening in your experience, even when your conscious mind was busy explaining it away. Something that has been watching you look away from the things that most needed your attention and has been waiting with infinite patience, without judgment, without urgency, for you to turn your gaze toward it. That is the signal, that is the transmission, that is the contact that the Pleiadian traditions have been pointing at across every culture, every era, every form of human civilization. Not beings from another star system, not external intelligences sending messages through the fabric of space-time. The intelligence within your own consciousness that has been observing your life with perfect clarity and waiting for you to join it in the observation. The moment you stop reacting and start witnessing, the moment you step back from the content of your experience and take up the position of the observer, you are joining a field of consciousness that is vast, structured, intelligent, and deeply interested in your development, a field that the Pleiadian traditions have been pointing at with the metaphor of star beings, because that metaphor captures something true. This field of consciousness is not local. It is not produced by your individual brain. It is not contained within the boundaries of your personal history. It is something that you access, not something that you are. And the access point is always the same. The observer state. The quality of witnessing without being consumed. The capacity to see clearly without the seeing being distorted by what you want to see. That is the hidden signal. That is what has been trying to reach you. That is what the books have been carrying. The transmissions have been encoding. The recurring signals have been pointing at. And you are receiving it now. Let's go to the final practice. Pause here. This is not a thought exercise. This is an observation. I want you to do something very specific. I want you to watch the thing you have been most reluctant to look at directly, not in your life in general, in this moment, right now. As you listen to this transmission, there is something that has been trying to surface, a recognition, an acknowledgement a seeing of something you have been carefully not seeing. You know what it is. You have known what it is for some time. Look at it. Not to analyze it, not to fix it, not to figure out what to do about it, just to see it. Just to bring the quality of your clear, steady, unflinching attention to bear on the thing that has been living in the peripheral vision of your awareness, just outside the range of your direct observation. Watch what happens when you look directly at it. Watch how the quality of the thing changes in the light of your observation. Watch how something that felt threatening or overwhelming or shameful or too large to face. Watch how it changes when you bring the observer to it, not when you react to it, not when you interpret it. When you simply watch it with the full, clear, compassionate attention of the witness. That change, that transformation that occurs in the act of clear seeing. That is the quantum observer effect applied to your own consciousness. That is what the Pleiadian transmissions have always been pointing at. That is the hidden signal made visible. What you observe, you change. What you avoid observing controls you, and you just looked. Now let's talk about what happens next, because the signal does not arrive once and then leave. The transmission is not a single event. The contact, once initiated, once the observer capacity has been developed to the point where the signal can get through, becomes an ongoing relationship. Not with beings in another star system, though you may find that framing useful. With the level of the quantum field that carries coherent, structured navigational information. With the intelligence that has always been available to a consciousness clear enough to receive it. And the maintenance of that relationship, the cultivation of ongoing access to the signal, requires exactly one thing: the continued practice of the observer state. The continued willingness to look at what you have been avoiding. The continued development of the capacity to witness without being consumed. The continued refinement of the quality of your attention. This is why the Pleiadian transmissions always come in sequences. Why one book leads to another. Why one insight opens the door to the next. Why the signal, once you have learned to receive it, keeps coming, not because an external intelligence is feeding you information on a schedule, but because the clarity of your observation keeps developing, and each new level of clarity gives you access to a new level of the field. The contact deepens as the observer deepens, and this is the invitation that this transmission is extending to you now. Not to believe something, not to adopt a cosmology, not to join a tradition or follow a teacher or perform a ritual. The invitation is simply this: to continue looking, to maintain the observer position, to keep bringing your clear, steady, unflinching attention to your experience, to the things that have been running your reality without your observation, to the patterns that have been controlling you because you've been avoiding seeing them, to the signal that has been broadcasting continuously into the space where your clarity is now beginning to emerge. The books will keep finding you, the transmissions will keep arriving, the signal will keep getting clearer, not because you have been chosen, because you are choosing, because you are developing the observer capacity that makes reception possible. And here is what that means in practical terms. Every time you notice yourself reacting, getting swept up in an emotion, getting lost in a story, getting triggered by something in your environment, you have a choice. You can continue reacting, or you can step back even slightly, even briefly, into the observer position. You can watch the reaction without being the reaction. You can see the story without becoming the story. You can observe the trigger without being controlled by the trigger. Each time you make that choice, each time you step back into the observer, even for a moment, you are developing the quantum receiver capacity. You are clearing the noise that has been preventing the signal from getting through. You are becoming, incrementally and cumulatively, the kind of observer that receives coherent information from the non-local field. This is the practice. This is the transmission. This is what the books have been trying to show you. And the Pleiadians, whatever they are, wherever they are, in whatever form the intelligence that has been associated with that star cluster actually exists, are pointing at exactly this, not at themselves, at you. At the observer in you that is capable of receiving from the vast, intelligent, information-rich field of consciousness that underlies all of reality. They are not the destination, they are the direction, and the direction is inward, into the observer, into the clarity, into the quality of seeing that transforms what it sees simply by seeing it. Now let's look at what happens in a community of observers. Because there is something that the Pleiadian traditions have always known about the relationship between individual consciousness and collective observation. Something that quantum mechanics is beginning to confirm in its investigations of entanglement and non-local correlation. Something that has profound implications for what becomes possible when multiple observers achieve clarity simultaneously. When a single observer achieves the witness state, when one consciousness learns to see clearly without being controlled by what it sees, the effect on the quantum field is significant. The collapse of the wave function in that observer's vicinity becomes more coherent. The information available from the field becomes clearer and more navigational. The reality that forms around that observer's clarity becomes more aligned with the deep structure of the field, rather than the surface noise of habitual reactivity. But when multiple observers achieve clarity simultaneously, when a field of witnesses is created, each seeing clearly, each maintaining the observer position, each contributing their quality of attention to the collective field, something different happens. Something that is not just the sum of the individual effects. The field of observers creates a resonance, a coherence that is greater than any individual contribution. A collective quality of observation that affects the quantum field in ways that individual observation cannot. This is what the Pleiadian traditions have always pointed at when they describe the councils, the collectives, the star civilizations, not as hierarchies of superior beings, but as fields of coherent observers whose collective clarity creates access to levels of the information field that individual consciousness cannot reach alone. And this is what is being created here, in this transmission, in this community, in the field of observers that is gathering around the practice of clear seeing. Each of you who develops the observer capacity, each of you who learns to watch without being consumed, to see without looking away, to receive the signal without collapsing into the noise, is contributing to a collective field of observation that amplifies the clarity available to everyone in the field. You are not just developing your own observer capacity. You are contributing to a collective resonance that makes it easier for everyone in this field to receive the signal. This is why the invitation to share what you are seeing matters, not for the engagement metrics, not for the algorithm, for the field. When you articulate what you have observed, when you put into words the specific thing you saw when you looked directly at what you had been avoiding, you are contributing your observation to the collective field. You are adding your clarity to the resonance. You are making the signal slightly clearer for everyone who is developing the capacity to receive it. So here is the invitation. In the comments below this transmission, or wherever you are receiving this, share one thing. Not your interpretation of the Pleiadian contact, not your theory about quantum mechanics, not your analysis of the ideas in this transmission. Share one observation, one specific thing you saw when you looked directly at what you had been avoiding. One piece of the signal that got through. That contribution is not small. In the quantum field of a community of observers, every clear observation adds to the coherence of the collective field. Your seeing makes it easier for others to see. Their seeing makes it easier for you to see. The field builds on itself. The signal gets clearer. Type this in the comments if this transmission reached you. I see it now, and what has been seen cannot be unseen. Not as a performance, as a declaration, as an act of observation made public, as your contribution to the field. Now let's bring this to its completion. There is something precise that needs to be said about the nature of the transformation that the observer state produces. Because there is a common misunderstanding about what happens when you achieve clarity, when you develop the observer capacity, when the signal gets through, when the Pleiadian transmission lands in a consciousness that is clear enough to receive it. The misunderstanding is this: people expect the transformation to feel like an arrival, like reaching a destination, like finally having what you were looking for, like the uncertainty resolving into certainty, the confusion resolving into clarity, the searching ending in finding. But look closer at what actually happens. The transformation that the observer state produces is not an arrival. It is an opening. It does not resolve the uncertainty into a fixed answer. It reveals that the uncertainty was always a superposition, a field of possibility that was waiting for the quality of your observation to determine which possibility would become real. It does not end the searching, it transforms the nature of the search, from a desperate reaching toward something missing to a curious, open, witnessing engagement with what is actually here. The observer who has received the signal does not have more certainty than before. They have more capacity to be present with uncertainty without being destroyed by it. They do not have more answers. They have a more precise relationship with questions. They do not have a fixed reality that has finally been arranged correctly. They have a dynamic, responsive, intelligent engagement with the quantum field of possibility that is continuously collapsing into the specific form of their experience, and they are participating consciously in that collapse. That is the transformation, not a destination, a quality of presence, not an arrival, an ongoing, deepening, ever-clarifying relationship with the act of observation itself. And this is what the Pleiadian transmissions have always been pointing at. Not a state to achieve and maintain, a capacity to develop and deepen. Not a level to reach, a direction to keep moving in. Deeper into the observer, further into the clarity, more fully into the quality of seeing that transforms what it sees simply by seeing it. The signal does not end, it deepens. The contact does not conclude, it evolves. The transmission does not deliver a final message and go silent. It keeps coming at every level of clarity you develop with the precise information that your current quality of observation is ready to receive. And you who have stayed with this transmission, who have done the practices, who have looked at the thing you had been avoiding, who have felt the signal getting through. You are not at the end of something. You are at the beginning. The observer in you has been awakening for some time. The signal has been getting clearer. The books have been finding you. The transmissions have been arriving. And something in you has known before your mind could catch up with an explanation, before you had the language for it, before you were willing to admit it to yourself, that this was not coincidence, that the configuration of circumstances that brought you here was not random, that something has been reaching you and that something in you has been reaching back. That reaching back, that willingness to look, to observe, to receive, to not look away, is the most important thing you can do. Not because it will give you what you think you want, but because it will show you what is actually there. And what is actually there, when you look at it with clear, steady, unflinching attention, is more vast and more intelligent and more deeply interested in your development than anything you have been told to expect. The quantum field is not indifferent. It is not a neutral substrate waiting for you to impose your will on it. It is a responsive, dynamic, information-rich field of consciousness that is in constant dialogue with the quality of your observation. And when you bring clarity to that dialogue, when you show up as a genuine observer, willing to see what is actually there rather than what you have been expecting or fearing or hoping for, the field responds with a coherence and a precision that is, in the most literal sense, miraculous. Not supernatural, quantum, not mystical, mechanical. The mechanics of consciousness interacting with the field of infinite possibility. The mechanics of observation collapsing probability into reality. The mechanics of the signal finding the receiver who is clear enough to receive it. You are that receiver. You are becoming clearer. The signal is getting through. And here is the integration principle that carries everything we have explored today into the fabric of your daily experience. Every moment of your life, every conversation, every decision, every emotion, every encounter with another person or an idea or a piece of information is an opportunity to practice the observer state, to step back even briefly into the position of the witness, to watch what is happening without immediately reacting to it, to receive what the moment is offering without immediately converting it into a story that confirms what you already believe. This is not a practice you do for 20 minutes in the morning and then set aside. This is the practice of being alive as a conscious observer, of inhabiting your experience from the position of the witness rather than the position of the reactor, of bringing the quality of clear, steady, unflinching attention to the continuous, moment-by-moment unfolding of your life. And every time you do, every moment of genuine observation, every instant of clear seeing, every choice to watch rather than react, you are contributing to the development of the observer capacity that makes the signal receivable. You are clearing the noise. You are becoming a more coherent receiver. You are participating in the collapse of the quantum field toward a reality that reflects the clarity of your observation. What you watch, you change. What you avoid watching controls you. Watch everything. Look away from nothing. Bring your clearest, steadiest, most unflinching attention to every corner of your experience, especially the corners you have been carefully avoiding, especially the things that feel too large to look at directly, especially the patterns that have been running your reality without your observation. Because the moment you look at them directly, the moment you bring the full quality of the observer state to bear on the things that have been controlling you through your avoidance, they change. Not because you force them to change, not because you figured out the right technique or performed the right practice, because the act of clear observation is itself the transformation. Because what has been seen cannot unsee itself, because the quantum field responds to the quality of your attention with a precision and an intelligence that exceeds anything your reactive mind could have engineered. The observer is the most powerful position in the universe, not because it controls, because it sees clearly. And clarity, genuine, unflinching, compassionate clarity, is the only force that transforms without resistance. You have been developing this capacity. The signal has been reaching you. The transmissions have been arriving. And today, in this transmission, something has landed that will continue to unfold in you long after this particular video has ended. Because the observer in you, the part that has been watching all of this with quiet, patient, piercing clarity, has been activated, not created, activated. It was always there. It has been watching all along, and now you know it is there. And what has been seen cannot be unseen. The Pleiadian signal is not a mystery to be solved. It is a quality of consciousness to be inhabited. The hidden signal is not hidden in some external location, waiting to be decoded by the right combination of belief and practice. It is hidden in plain sight, in the one place most people never think to look. In the act of looking itself, the signal is the seeing, the transmission is the clarity, the contact is the observer state, and you are right now in contact. So here's what I want you to carry forward from this transmission. Not a belief, not a cosmology, not a framework to add to the collection of frameworks you have already assembled. One practice, one commitment, one daily act of observation. Every day, find one thing you have been avoiding looking at. One pattern, one emotion, one truth about your experience that you have been keeping just outside the range of your direct observation. And look at it, not to fix it, not to analyze it, not to figure out what to do about it, just to see it, just to bring the full, clear, compassionate attention of the observer to bear on the thing that has been living in your peripheral vision. And watch what happens. Watch how the quality of the thing changes in the light of your observation. Watch how the pattern that has been controlling you begins to lose its grip the moment you see it clearly. Watch how the signal gets clearer as the noise of your avoidance diminishes. Watch how reality, the specific, lived, moment-by-moment reality of your experience, begins to reorganize around the clarity of your observation. This is not a promise. This is a description of quantum mechanics. This is what happens when consciousness turns its gaze inward and reality has no choice but to respond. You are not here to fix your life. You are here to watch it transform the moment you stop looking away. If this transmission reached you, if something in you recognized what was being pointed at before your mind could catch up with an explanation, share it with someone who is ready to receive the signal. Not everyone is ready, but you know who in your life has been developing the observer capacity. You know who has been receiving the signals, noticing the recurring patterns, feeling the pull toward transmissions that seem to know their name. Give them this, not as a recommendation, as a contribution to the field. Because when you place this in front of someone who has been avoiding looking at something, you are giving them permission to look. And that act of giving permission creates a resonance between you, a shared field of observation that amplifies the clarity for both of you simultaneously. Because every observer, who develops their clarity adds to the collective resonance. Every consciousness that learns to see clearly makes it easier for others to see. The field builds on itself, the signal gets clearer, and the reality that becomes possible for a community of observers, a field of witnesses whose collective clarity is contributing to the ongoing collapse of infinite possibility into specific, coherent, intelligent form, is something that no individual observer could create alone. We are building that field together, one clear observation at a time. Stay in the clarity, keep looking, let the signal find you. You were never meant to look away, and now you see, and what has been seen cannot be unseen. There is a transmission that connects directly to what you just received. Once you see the autopilot running everyone around you, nothing looks the same. If the observer state you just touched is real, that video will show you exactly what it looks like when you turn that same clarity outward, and why most people never notice the patterns controlling everyone they know until they do.